So welcome. We are Long Now Boston, and today's talk is going to be with David Barzilai, How Longer Healthy Lives Change Everything. So I'll start by saying that these are challenging and weird times that we are living in. And so much stuff is happening every single day. It's really hard to think more than an hour ahead or even a day. But what we at Long Now Boston try to do is help stimulate long-term thinking, deep time, the long now. Hundreds of years, thousands of years, not just what's going to happen this week, what's going to happen next week. Even decades seem really distant to us right now because the future is so uncertain, the present is so uncertain. But long-term change comes with real responsibilities for us today. And that's one of our key points. How can we today be better ancestors to our future descendants, whether they're biological or cultural or just other human? So how can we today make decisions that will help influence the future? And one way we can do that is by learning from the past and by thinking carefully about those deep time issues. And that's what we do. So the term long now is a framework that invites us to think of now as not just this very moment, but extending into the past, extending into the future, deep time on both sides. So Long Now Boston has been around for about 10 years. Our mission is to encourage long-term thinking here in the Boston area. So we host a conversation series like this. We get interesting speakers from all walks of life: architecture, history, tech, art, space, music, philosophy, medicine, as well as a series of meetups and events all around the Boston area. We just recently had a tour of the Cambridge Fusion Systems tokamak reactor, which was Commonwealth Fusion Systems, which was amazing. And that was a members only event. So if you are interested in things like that, you should join us as you. So let's see. If that kind of stuff is interesting to you, we have a sign-up sheet right there. You can join our mailing list. You can go to our mailing list, sign up there, check out our social media, and of course, we would love to have you as a volunteer as well. We are always looking to enlarge our steering group, and those are the folks that help us put on events like this. And we have some of our wonderful volunteers here today. So let's see, upcoming events. Our next event is a co-sponsorship with the Harvard Bookstore. Bruno Carvalho, Harvard professor, will be talking about his new book, The Invention of the Future as Cities in the Modern World, which may or may not happen, depending on the weather. We'll have to see. But further on in 2026, we've got an event on mushrooms and fungus at the Harvard Herbaria, which will be actually really amazing. We've got Mira Isakovitz coming. We've got Juan Enriquez coming later this year. And we're thinking about grid-scale energy, nuclear proliferation, and more as well. So check all of that out. So that brings us to today's event. How longer healthy lives change everything, with David Barzilai. Dr. Barzilai is a globally recognized longevity physician. He's the CEO of Barzilai Longevity Consulting, and he's the founding faculty member and trustee of the Geneva College of Longevity Science. He serves as a lecturer at Harvard Medical School. He holds dual doctorates, MD and PhD, and he's board certified as a diplomat at the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine. He's a frequent keynote speaker at major scientific and medical conferences, and he's known for translating cutting-edge research into practical, high-impact interventions. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. David Barzilai. Thank you.
To prove my functional strength and capacity here, being a longevity medicine physician. So good morning, everyone. It's really an honor and pleasure to be with you. This is going to be a very intimate time where I hope to have a lot of exchange and conversations with what more suitable group than Long Now Boston, thinking about not just now, not just in a decade, but future generations. We will be ancestors to the future that inherits our decisions today. And I can date my first passion to be futurist, although I look relatively young, it's all a relative thing, right? To 1993. So 1993, I was invited just out of college to join the first ever student panel of the World Future Society, where it was a futurist society that we're talking about, we didn't call it the internet because that name didn't really get catchy yet. But I think just remembering those days when we were doing Archie and Veronica and FTP and all of these obscure protocols, and then Mosaic became born, and then more popular today browsers came out. Just think how much has changed and how difficult it is to imagine this future. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about some interesting things, but by way of introduction, the abbreviated format, since you know a little bit about me. So I'm a medical doctor, I'm a longevity medicine physician. My focus is on helping people move from simply living longer to healthy longevity. I do consulting, I'm on advisory boards, and a lot of my work sits at the intersection of medicine, research, and education, all with the goal of translating longevity science into decisions that improve real lives. Now, I have at the top, I always have to mention my affiliations, and no conflicts of interest, except we all have skin in the game, literally and figuratively, when it comes to longer, healthier lives, right, in ourselves and in our families. The Geneva College of Longevity Science, I'm a lecturer for them and a founding faculty and trustee. There's the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives, and I'm an advisor for them. And that's kind of sort of the political for Congress to be aware of innovation, to think about funding adequately and supporting through reform ways to accelerate therapeutics to people. I'm now an advisor of ALSI. For simplicity, it's having basically like Hollywood and people like that engage with the public so people are aware of the importance of this work. And I'm a Harvard Medical School lecturer. I'd be remiss not to mention in that vein that I'm also a medical advisor of a production team of a film called Longevity Revolution. And the executive producer, Ruben, basically invited me to bring in folks. There's essentially, it's about raising awareness about the sort of longevity therapeutics that may come. And to support it adequately. So their previous features had Tony Robbins, Mark Cuban, many more, and the next one's going to have Robert De Niro and a number of other names. But I want you to be aware of it. So if this sounds interesting to you, come and see me afterwards, because they're looking for content straight out of the labs for longevity therapeutics. They're also have an investors and partners segment as well. So this is going to be a big production. So back to today, okay? So I want to explore a simple idea with massive consequences, how longer, healthier lives can change almost everything about our society. And most of my talks focus on longevity therapeutics, whether it's a longevity medicine physician or bringing things from the lab or aging biotech. This talk is completely different. This talk is so critical. When I immersed myself with the focus here of Long Now Boston, what are we really interested in? We're interested in making responsible decisions right now for a future that is good for everybody, right? So the focus of today's talk isn't going to be the exact science and medicine of it, but rather, what if we succeed? What if we succeed? And what are the expected and unexpected potential consequences? What do we have within our control? And what will be more challenging? Because we want to be prepared for that. We want to be proactive. So it ends up being a future we're all excited to have. Without further ado, okay. So longer lives present a central tension here. I want you to hold this thought through our talk. Humanity's achieved something rather remarkable. We've added about 30 years to longer life expectancy over the past century. But many of those added years are now years with morbidity or poor health or health conditions. We're extending lifespan, but we're not proportionally extending health span, the time in our life relatively free from adverse health, which includes basic things like function or our energy level when we wake up, what we can do before. So what we want to think about today is how longer lives without longer health can create a burden, and how can we be responsible in that vein. Longer lives with health can create more possibility, on the other hand. More years for contribution, more years for experienced mentors, the long-term game, and more skin in the game, because that future is our future if we live longer. Now, the difference between these two futures isn't biology alone, which I'll touch upon briefly. I am aging doc. I will talk a little bit about geroscience. But we're going to be focusing on institutions, individuals, and every facet of society, every major facet of society that we can foresee. So it's divided into two parts. The first part is what happens if the current trend continues. We'll look at the demographic shift underway, the gap between living longer and living well, and where our institutions are already straining. And part two asks, what if we succeed? What if geroscience delivers its promise, geroscience being the biology of aging that may promote longer lives and potentially longer, healthier lives? And let's frame it lastly by thinking about a moonshot. Let's say we can have it all. What do we need to do now to achieve that? So let's start with scale. Currently, people age 65 and above represent about 10%, have moved about 10% of the world's population today, and will blow up to 16% by 2050. Meanwhile, the oldest people over 80, that's growing even faster, tripling from about 143 million to 426 million. And 2018 already represented the first time in human history ever that we've had more people over 65 than children under 5. And we could give whole lectures on why. It's mostly not medical science. It's mostly like sanitation, public health, some immunization and antibiotics. So some of it is basic medical practices, but a lot of it is avoiding famine, infection, and the social determinants of disease and ill health. So speed matters here. Like, think about it. France took 115 years to shift from 7% to 14% of the population over 65. And we're seeing basically in a single generation, roughly, similar changes in terms of the amount of time we're spending in ill health. So the National Academy of Medicine calls this unprecedented, comparable to climate change, impacting work, impacting healthcare, impacting cities, impacting our families. Now, there's a 10-year gap currently between how long we live and how long we live with what most people consider reasonable health. HALE is one measure. It's from the World Health Organization. So just think about HALE as healthy lifespan without morbidity. That gap between how long we're living and how long we're living in good health, it's only expanding. In other words, we've gained more in lifespan than we have in good health. So what does that translate to? we're spending more years sick. Women, it's particularly difficult for them. They live longer than men, but then they spend about 2.4 more years in poor health. And this inequality extends beyond gender, and this is part of what we need to actively plan for. What we find is, in considering the benefits of longevity, US researchers have documented about a 20-year difference in lifespan expectancy between some neighborhoods and other neighborhoods that are only miles apart. So just imagine the next census code, a 20-year difference in lifespan and greater gap in health span. So this isn't random. It tends to be disadvantaged populations that face worse environments, right? More stress, less access to healthcare, more barriers to healthy behavior. There's a behavioral aspect too. Lower income individuals often face higher exposures too, right? Poor air quality, unsafe work, unhealthy food environments. A lot of our health behaviors are governed by our closest relations, both from a district level and a family unit level. So this means earlier chronic disease, more disability in a disproportionate way. So what we really want is, if we have these advances, for there to be more equity, not for there to be a larger gap. So this means we must simultaneously address the source of inequality along with these initiatives. And the National Academy of Medicine and the World Bank are both spearheading think tanks to address these fundamental questions. Now, I want to introduce a core concept for us to understand what our target is. It's the concept of compression of morbidity. It translates, living longer doesn't always mean living healthier, as we've discussed. So in 1980, a Stanford professor, James Fries, proposed a hopeful hypothesis. Remember, it's a hypothesis, and it's up to us to create this reality. If we could delay the onset of chronic disease, the period of illness would be compressed into a shorter window of time in life. So what's our ideal fantasy? It's like, I live till insert some name, some age you want to live until, and then say, and then I die in my sleep peacefully, right? So the evidence since then has been mixed, at least insofar as our modern healthcare system, or I like to call it our sick care system, as much as it gets some things very well, it gets other things very unwell. Among higher income, better educated populations, life expectancy and the proportion of life spent without disability has been roughly stable or modestly improving. So that proportion of the time spent sick versus healthy, roughly the same, although when you think about it, that also means more years spent sick, but you also get more years spent healthy. That's best case scenario. That's for people who are doing best. For those who are less socioeconomically and educationally advantaged, they have tended to gain years, while to a lesser extent, and their morbidity, the total number of years that they spend in poor health, has gone up proportionally. So it's more of their time, so more sick time. Now, critics have pointed to the failures of success, medical advances that save lives but extend chronic disease management rather than preventing it. Now, the bottom line is that compression of morbidity doesn't happen automatically. It's shaped by prevention, access to care, living conditions, and it's shaped by our policy. It's shaped by the kind of conversations we're all going to have here today in this room at Long Now Boston. So there are various economic models on aging, and typically a lot of us have, without studying the issue in depth, we think of it as the aging time bomb. More retirees, fewer workers, unsustainable costs. It brings about trepidation about our future. It frames aging as a burden to be managed. Now that narrative, however, makes an assumption. It makes an assumption that we should question, I would say. It assumes that people stop contributing at 65, and then they're burdened a healthcare burden, an emotional burden, and a tax on society. This is not accurate. It's not accurate today, and we can make it more inaccurate with the right decisions here. That's my premise. It assumes that added years there's more frailty. It assumes that our institutions can't change, or we won't make them change. The research tells a different story, however. Economists like David Bloom, Lee and Mason, and Linda Fried have shown that when older adults stay healthy, they generate dividends. Now, there are multiple different kinds of dividends. 3 different kinds of dividends have been identified in the literature, okay? The first one, by Linda Fried, was the dividend we all think about, right? I mean, not strictly like an equity dividend for if you have a stock, but in the sense you're making money. That's an economic dividend you're adding to society. Lee and Mason built on that. There's a second dividend. The second dividend means that longer lives increases the incentives we have as individuals to invest in ourselves, our own, if I can borrow from economics, own human capital. What does that mean? More time developing skills, more investment in our education, both formal and informal, accumulating assets, strengthening our productivity. That's the second dividend. And there's even a third dividend. A third dividend? Well, individuals, the third demographic dividend, and this was Linda Fried, healthier older adults contributing through both paid work, but also volunteering, caregiving, which we'll touch on later, mentoring, civic engagement. The fiscal pressures we worry about are largely policy-made. And as economist Boris Chupin puts it, they're artifacts of retirement rules and pension designs, not the aging process itself inherently. So, where are the institutions straining now? Because that's an important part if we're going to achieve our mission today together in this room. Let's consider our future and let's map where the stresses show up first. Well, there's work, right? Our career structures assume education, work, and retirement in that order. One sequence, one repetition. That's it. You educate, you work, you retire. But the model breaks when the career spans 50 years. And age discrimination is rampant. Some studies have shown that it starts as early as age 45. And retraining infrastructure is thin, challenging this. Pensions, Social Security was designed from a time when most people died before collecting. And now for a pension system, even if you've made it that far, it's for a short window, right? 15 years, not 25, 30 plus years. And the World Economic Forum estimates that global pension funding gap exceeded 400 trillion, or will exceed that by 2050. So that's another area that we're going to address. Another third area we're going to address is in healthcare. We're excited about acute rescue, right? Saving lives in emergencies. It's critical. I mean, if I break my bone or I have a heart attack, I want like modern medicine, like giving me the TPA. I want them to be able to isolate my fracture. They do a great job there. But our systems are poorly equipped for maintaining function over decades where we start to accumulate chronic disease. A lot of it is whack-a-mole medicine. We do try to mitigate risk factors, and I gave a TED talk on this earlier. Look out for it to be released later this year about our fractured modern medical system and contrasting it with proactive longevity medicine. But long story short, the U.S. has about 2,500 geriatricians to take care of 60 million people over 65, and we're more reactive than we are proactive. The care economy is another facet. 53 million Americans alone provide uncompensated care to loved ones, which itself lowers our productivity as a society, right? Not to mention emotionally, psychologically, how do we want to structure our society to increase gross national happiness, right? The WHO, World Health Organization, we discussed earlier, but suffice it to say that fewer than 5% of homes have basic accessibility features. So we're going to address that too. A lot of people don't want to live like connected to a machine in a room by yourself, uncomfortable, away from the communities you know. A lot of people want to be at home, right? But our homes, they're not equipped for that. So that's something else we'll dive into. So, the sustainability reckoning. Pension math is simple and brutal. When Social Security was designed at 1935, life expectancy at 65 was about 12 years if you attained it, as we briefly touched on earlier. In 1965, there were about 5 working age adults for every person over 65 in OECD countries. By 2050, that ratio is closer to 2 to 1. Think about that. Think about all the brothers and sisters available to help take care of mom and dad, and think about now a 1 to 2 ratio. The Social Security trustees project that the funds will exhaust by mid-2030s based on current levels of benefits. That's not an unworkable system. It's one we need to intelligently design and not avoid till the last minute because it's politically radioactive. Because what do we know from driving? We know we're a lot better if we put our foot on the brake or we start steering left and right further away from the accident. We're going to do a lot better. Same thing for Social Security. We want to measure benefits, and benefits one way to do it is to cut benefits by about 20% or increase taxes. There are different ways to do it, but something has to give. The options are familiar: raising retirement ages, increasing contributions, reducing benefits, or boosting productivity so fewer workers can support more retirees. None of this is politically easy, but the most expensive thing is to do nothing. Don't worry, the talk will get more optimistic later. It's only by understanding the challenges before us. Think, Churchill. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this is on the scope of climate change and along some dimensions of scope. So the economist Andrew Scott calls the traditional life course a 3-stage life: education, work, retirement. We touched on this earlier. Let's double click on it. When careers might span 50 to 60 years, we might need something different. So I'm imagining multi-stage careers where people cycle through periods of learning, work, caregiving, and civic contributions. Not into a fixed sequence, but fluidly. I know, I've experienced this myself. I opened my first LLC at 49. When does the evidence actually say about productivity? It's more nuanced than stereotypes suggest. Cognitive processing speed does decline with age, but experience, judgment, and crystallized knowledge often compensate. And productivity declines tend to be minimal until late 70s. And this is an average, because I know people in their 80s who could do circles around some people in their 20s. So these are heavily domain dependent. And one persistent myth is that older workers take jobs from younger workers. Now, granted, this is an ecological study, and my PhD is in health services research and epidemiology and biostatistics, so you can critique in terms of causality. But the fact is, if you do a comparison between countries that have more older workers and other countries that have fewer older workers, the countries that have more older workers have no more problem with younger person employment than those other countries. So this is not a causality randomized controlled trial, but it does tell us something, right? It tells us it's possible. So we can design that, right? So let's now double click on the function imperative, what I like to call the function imperative. Most modern systems were built for a world where the dominant threats were acute, especially infectious disease. The basic model was when you get sick, you get treated, you recover, or you don't. Now, chronic aging societies face a different pattern. The challenge is chronic conditions, multiple conditions at once, cognitive change, frailty, often unfolding over years or decades. Now, success can't be defined only by treating episodes. It has to be defined by sustaining function, independence, and I would add joy. That's exactly what the World Health Organization frames as healthy aging. It's not being disease-free, though that wouldn't be bad. We can strive for as close to that as possible, but it's about maintaining functional ability, that people can do what they want to do in the environments where they live in. And a practical example is frailty. Like, remember we mentioned Linda Fried earlier? So she has a widely used frailty phenotype that gives clinicians a way to identify people at higher risk of decline, using indicators like unintentional weight loss, weakness, slowness, exhaustion, low activity. So the punchline is, if we want to add years to be lived well, we need to evolve from a sick care to a healthcare model, from rescuing people in crises to keeping people functional for decades. So here's a crisis hiding in plain sight. 3 million Americans provide unpaid care to family members, all while working, often for years. The AARP estimates that economic value of this unpaid labor at about $600 billion annually, more than the total Medicaid spending. But it comes at an enormous personal cost: lost income, depleted saving, compromised health. And the cost to caregivers are substantial. Professional workers are underpaid, they're overworked, they're leaving the field. Turnover rates in long-term care is approaching 100% annually in some settings. So the substantial costs include the exit of the workforce to higher rates, faced reduced lifetime earnings, high rates of depression, physical problems, caregiver and caretaker. So the demographics here are brutal for the reasons we discussed before. So what we really need to look at is, since fertility rates are failing, meaning fewer children per elder to provide care, and geographic mobility exacerbating this among families. And add to that this is something positive. There's more female participation in the workforce, but traditionally female labor participation has contributed to caregiving role, and that's reduced traditional reserve of unpaid caregivers. So we need to redesign based on what we value. We all want to live in dignity, so we want to do what we can so we can live as independently as possible, but also to have the quality of those years, because we all need help at some point in our life to have that in a setting and context that works for everyone in society. So family structures are changing in ways we haven't fully absorbed. More generations are alive simultaneously than ever. Now we have 4-generation families. These are increasingly common, and they're scattered, making care and coordination harder. These are so-called beanpole families, where you have mostly vertical generations with maybe a couple on each level. This brings complex questions about our time, money, housing, and decision-making. Who provides the care, how long, and what's possible? So housing compounds the problem. So let's focus on that now. 90% of older adults say they want to live in their old homes. Do you want to live in your own home? Do you want to live in an institution? Maybe if it's a communal institution, there are fun activities and you have some privacy, but you want it to be a place that's lively and not, you're sort of plugged into a machine, right? You want it to be like a real community. So what we want to focus on here is that fewer than 5% of homes have the basic features needed to be independent at home. So that includes zero-step entryways, right? Because you can fall tripping. First floor bedrooms, accessible bathrooms. Our cities compound the problem too. So let's think about this in terms of city designs. I'm a serial educator, so I'm always studying something. I'm always studying something. I'm getting Blue Zone certified. So something I appreciate is Blue Zone certified cities appreciates that some of the social determinants of diseases are environment. So if you live in an area that's not safe and there's no real place for you to walk, you're going to have less physical activity. Same thing for your food environment if you live in a food desert and so forth. But the idea here is, from our planning perspective here at the Long Now, is car-dependent suburban design isolates when you don't have infrastructure in place, whether it's public transportation, walkways, and so forth. So that's something else we can be focusing on for creating a livable tomorrow. Not just a living tomorrow, but a livable tomorrow, right? So let's talk about rewriting that script, okay? Here's something that surprised me when I started this work. We've deeply embedded cultural scripts about aging. They're mostly negative. Older people are basically frail, dependent, or out of touch. That's the image of being out of touch, right? Ageism is pervasive. The World Health Organization estimates that about half that's about half of the world is affected by it in some form or another. Now, Robert Butler, who founded the National Institute on Aging, coined the term ageism originally. And it's these stereotypes that push people in a narrow box. And what often happens, and this is my experience as a physician, it's when people get labeled a certain way, it's difficult not to not conform to that label. From social pressure, from self-concept. We really want to be encouraging people to the pinnacle of Maslow's pyramid of real self-actualization, right? When we have the most experience and a multitude of skills and capacities, as well as historical perspective to bring to the world. So the psychological data actually tells us a different story. Laura Karstenek's research finds that on average, emotional experience often improves with age. We've all heard, one of my favorite books I liked was Daniel Coleman's Emotional Quotient, EQ, good book. And basically EQ can rise with experience, something the whole world needs more of today, I think. And fewer negative emotions can mean better emotional balance, but there's interesting data that older adults report higher life satisfaction than middle-aged adults. Part of that might be that middle-aged sandwich for those of you who are or have been in this situation, taking care of parents, taking care of kids simultaneously. Interestingly enough, the outlook can be more positive also. There's a kind of a bias where older individuals focus less on negative signals. That's not all a good thing, actually. A lot of people say, oh, it's good. You see, we're focusing on the positive. But it's not all a good thing to focus only on the negative either. We need both in this world. So a gap between negative cultural script and the lived experience of many older people suggests we're working with the wrong narrative. And what we need is new scripts, right? Ones where we see older adults as contributors, mentors, and participants, active participants in our society, not just consumers of care. The narrative is infrastructure. It shapes whether longer lives can translate into engagement and stewardship. So we're going to, in a little bit, we're going to just touch upon, because I have to touch on a little on longevity science on at least a conceptual basis. But I would be, again, remiss if I didn't highlight that the most effective interventions we have right now, outside of the best of modern medicine, preventative medicine, precision medicine, is lifestyle medicine. I'm a diplomat of the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine. That basically relates to our behaviors and practices. Whether it's not smoking or not drinking too much, or it's exercise, or it's diet, or sleep, stress, relationships, purpose, meaning, all these things are part of lifestyle medicine. So before we get into that frontier model, I want to make it clear Physical activity is actually the single strongest predictor of healthy aging by some metrics. Even modest increases of movement reduce mortality, improve function, delay cognitive decline, and it's fun. It lets us be active and get out there. So not smoking adds a decade to life. Managing metabolic health, weight, blood pressure, glucose, all these things prevent a whole cascade of chronic diseases that drive a disability. And social connection matters more than most people realize. Loneliness is associated with about the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of the mortality impact or on an association level. And sleep is foundation to everything, right? From immune function to cognitive health to emotional regulation to being able to follow the other things we should be doing, right? It's like we tend to overeat and overstress and make poor decisions. Sleep is huge. So when we combine a few low-risk behaviors, the evidence suggests that you can prevent a substantial share of chronic disease, 40 to 80%, depending on how you count it. But the cutting-edge science, none of this is the cutting-edge science, and I would argue that cutting-edge science has a potential, which needs to be shown, of taking us further. So I don't believe it's like you need to choose one or the other. The gap between what we know works and what actually gets implemented is enormous, and we should be thinking about that as we think together as a group on restructuring our society now for a better future for all of us. So what institutions should do now in the context of what we've covered so far, a few thoughts is, one is to strengthen primary care and prevention, right? We're talking about this acute care model versus a disease management, or I prefer better prevention and being proactive. And how about optimizing health? You know, one of the things I studied is positive psychology. There's a great certification program out of Kripalu for those interested in the Berkshires. And positive psychology is sort of not like regular psychology where you move from a negative number like depressed to neutral, like I'm not depressed. Oh, I'm so not depressed. But it rather moves it from 0 to a positive, say, move from I'm not depressed to I'm joyful, I'm excited about tomorrow, I'm thriving within my relationships, I am pro-social, all these wonderful things. So I think we should have the same thing for health, right? Health should not just be like the World Health Organization definition. It's that disease is not simply the absence of infirmity, it's all these other things that the WHO discussed, which is a level of personal as well as social functioning and thriving. So the World Health Organization launched the Decade of Healthy Aging, which is part of this, which relates to building age-friendly environment, combating ageism, and delivering integrated care, and having access to long-term care for those who are further along in the process, but in a way that's humane. And the World Bank has a 2024 report. Basically the same idea. They estimate that investments in healthy longevity could save 150 million lives in low and middle income countries by 2050, but that's a big if. What are we going to do? So we can do this now for everything as simple as adding big crosswalks in cities to funding home care to reduce fall, to have hospitalizations with new tech, such as one of my colleagues here from one of the Steve Wardell events had a little device you can put in your home. You could just, if you fall, it can detect if you fell, and you can get help right away. So, part 2. Notice the difference in the slide, like between now and the part 1? A little more optimistic, right? We don't want to get downright like giddy, like we're all going to live together forever immediately and all our problems are going to be fixed. But I think a little hope's a good thing, So this is going to be agnostic, but in that theme, kind of a futuristic look, because you can't call this unrealistic because this doesn't have a time on it, right? Imagine when we were when our species first differentiated along the evolutionary branch. Could we have imagined cars, planes? So who knows when this is, and we're probably not picturing it quite right, but something like this, sure. So I want to take us through a way to think about the part 2 slides. The part 2 slides are like how to think about it. So in the rest of the talk, it's easier to think about if we use a 3 scenario framework. Not prediction, just 3 plausible futures to help us separate biology from our choices. So scenario 1 is the baseline. It's like right now and pushing it forward. So what does that mean? Lifespan stays broadly bounded by today's biology. No major biology innovation. Most people still die, well short of 120, under 110. I mean, people will argue about these numbers, so I'll just give a little context. I was deciding what number to put there, okay? So we'll see some other statistics later, but even like in Okinawa, if you don't study the blue zones, it was like less than half of 1% who were centenarians in the population who was studied. And Hong Kong, who has the highest percentage of centenarians, that's women, so that's on the order of 10 to 15% probability of becoming one. So even to 100 is like a very improbable scenario for someone who lives in a very, very healthy environment. The oldest individual who ever lived in a relatively more validated way was a French woman, famous for drinking wine, loving chocolate, and having smoked up until something in her 90s. Although she smoked, she was like George Burns or Bill Clinton, depending, just a little bit, you know what I mean? She was 122. And there was a big gap between her number 2, and some people question whether that was real. So basically I've had as patients centenarians, but they're not very common, even if people do everything right and have good genes. And for 110 plus is extraordinary. They're called super centenarians. So we'll talk a little bit about those numbers, but in case you're wondering about that number. So that's scenario 1. Continuing the status quo, which means what? Means more time spent in poor health if we change nothing. Maybe incremental increase in lifespan a little bit. But the maximum lifespan is thought to be about the same since our species evolved. It's thought to be a species characteristic. Our lifespan is increased at birth mostly because of things like infant mortality, not dying from violence or infection prematurely, diseases that we might get in middle age. But our maximum lifespan, it's kind of like what our biology is inherently capable of within some range that isn't an extreme range. You won't have, so that's why you'll go back hundreds of years, you'll find people living in their 90s every once in a while. So scenario 2 is the Healthspan moonshot. This is what some people regard as the most realistic thing to aspire for, and you'll have debates and controversies between scenario 2 and scenario 3. Scenario 2 is a Healthspan moonshot, and we're going to talk about that. It's the most valuable scenario in terms of health span. We get serious about prevention. We build age-friendly environments. We adopt geroscience advances. Remember, that's the biology of aging, that maybe, if we can apply it to humans successfully, can make us live longer and healthier through something besides what we've been doing before, which has not made us live longer, healthier, just prevented premature ill disease, kind of prolonged our ill health and mitigate a little bit. And many people under scenario 2 will reach age 90, maybe even 100. So somewhere around there. Scenario 3 is the concept of radical longevity. So that's the word is used and thrown a lot in many different contexts. So I'll just simply label it as breakthroughs actually let people periodically reset their biologic age or slow it in a way that's profound. It's like a step functions beyond something we have witnessed, including have witnessed in model organisms so far, at least mammalian model organisms so far, that we have seen lifespan extension in some mammalian models to extent. This is speculative, but it raises profound questions. I mean, this group is very ambitious, right? like a decade, 2, 3 decades, that's not a long time from now. So we're imagining centuries, we're imagining eons. So to think and talk about radical longevity and how society might need to restructure what's possible, what's not, is germane to the mission of Long Now Boston. So let's focus now and dig in. Let's look at what aging biology tells us about limits. So Peter Fedichev, he's a geroscientist with a background in physics. His work on resilience is sobering. His team tracked how our bodies recover from stress, illness, and injury perturbations. With age, what tends to happen is recovery slows. We don't recover as much, and we don't always recover. And when we get back to homeostasis, it's a slower process. So without getting into the weeds about this particular set of researches, he did things like in our blood chemistry, what we might get checked at the doctor's office, like if we have a hypernatremia, or like our sodium levels are too high, not life-threatening too high, but too high, how long does it take to go back? And there's just a steady worsening of that with age. So he didn't take a look at individual diseases, but he just looked our fundamental biological processes that help us keep homeostasis. Based on his model, if you extrapolate that trend, and remember, this is an extrapolation, so it's not perfect, it's not an interpolation, it's reading beyond. But if you extrapolate it, he suspected, he hypothesized that maximum human lifespan, even if we do a lot of things addressing individual diseases, is somewhere on the ballpark of 120 to 150 years. So that's where even minor stresses can be overwhelming, like, the temperature outside or something. Now, Jay Olshansky, he's another researcher. He's actually has an economist sort of background. He has interdisciplinary. He actually coined the name the longevity dividend, which was part of the themes of today's talk from earlier. But he did a more recent analysis where he looked at the world's best longevity environments. He looked by country. And what he did is he looked at, for any given age range, any given age around the world, he picked the country with the very, very lowest mortality rate for that age. So he imagined a best case scenario, like the best of the best from around the world. And from that, he projected that unless something substantial changed in the biomedical geroscience type of intervention, we shouldn't expect more than about 15% of women and about 5% of men to reach 100. Now, there's something that often gets missed here. Even if we limited biologic aging entirely, there's extrinsic risks too, right? Accidents, violence, pandemics, and we tend to underestimate this because we die so young, in relative terms, relative to a blue whale or a tree, right? A Greenland shark might live 400 years. So when you look at the risk of basic things like driving a car, and I know this is changing with driverless cars and so forth, but planes, and we're talking about 8% survival over 500 years. So if we had the same lifestyle, only 8% would be around, even if we had no disease whatsoever, because some accident, something would take us. Although this brings us to these sci-fi movies where they imagine people living in these virtual machines, because it's too dangerous to leave it. But I want to emphasize that these are constraints under current biologic configuration. They're not immutable. If we can modify the aging process itself, and that's an if, this is exactly what geroscience is trying to do, the boundary shift. And this isn't like completely speculative, like pie in the sky. This is based on animal models that have shared a lot with us in common and have been the basis for all sorts of pharmacotherapy, some of which have worked out with interventions that have worked for humans and extended our lifespan. These models, it's able to slow or delay aging in these animal models. So that brings us to the geroscience hypothesis. So trust me, this is interesting, okay? Hypothesis, geroscience, a lot of words. So geroscience, what I mentioned, is built on a simple but powerful insight that aging itself is a dominant risk factor for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's and other dementia, and other chronic diseases. here's the intuition from demographic modeling. Even if you could cure cancer entirely, and by the way, this was also work by J. Olshansky that I mentioned earlier. If you cure cancer entirely, any thoughts how much that would extend lifespan? 2 decades? 4? Yeah, like 3 or 4 years. Good, good. A very literate and attentive, detail-oriented group. That's right. But isn't that astounding? So how can that be? Like, when I first saw that, I was like, you know, I love the mathematics. So the mathematics makes sense to me. This is, in plain terms, this is a competing risk model. What happens is every single cause of our death, not every single, but many, many, many associated with getting older. I mean, you don't have many kids getting heart attacks unless you have a congenital defect or dementia, right? Unless there's something funny going on. You actually see an exponential rise in all of these because what's happening is our biology of aging, our biologic age, so not just our chronologic age, is accelerating. You see that at every level. You see it in our cells. You see that in our molecular biology. You see that in our tissue. You see the way our tissues communicate with one another. So if one condition doesn't get you, you missed that cancer, but your heart disease progressed too far, even with a perfect diet. So that's our foe, right? So similar estimates suggest that eliminating major cardiovascular deaths at only a handful of years, not decades. It's not because the diseases don't matter, as I said, but because aging is upstream risk multiplier for all of these. So there's a hallmark of aging framework, and in some of my other talks I show you a nice pretty diagram, but this is a different focus today. But there are these different fundamental processes that we haven't identified all of them. They're not complete. They're not cookie cutter, non-overlapping. It's complex. But the idea, there are things we can target that if we successfully target model organisms, we can slow or delay, or in some cases, revert aspects of biologic aging. And with that, relevantly, lifespan. And with that, very relevantly for this talk, also metrics of health span, ways we try to measure like the grip strength of a mouse, or how quick it can run, or how vigorous it looks, its hair color. So these include mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic inflammation, a whole bunch of others. We used to have 9, now we have 12. So the idea is, the fundamental logic of geroscience is this: don't just prune the branches. Don't wait until things after manifest where it's often too late, but get things at the source where the biology of aging can address all these things simultaneously and slow the very process that fixates our species at a certain maximum lifespan, right? I mean, think about it. I mentioned the Greenland shark earlier. It's another animal. How is it lives so much longer? Well, it's a shark. Well, you know, it's got a heart, it's got tissues, it's got blood vessels, it's got a brain, it's got bones. You know, can be structural challenges, and there can be questions if we're already built like this, how far we can go. But we're even learning how to sort of re-engineer our own tissues and replace our tissues. These are all for another talk. They're all for another talk. So I'm just giving a few examples. There are many other examples. I just thought these might be interesting for this audience. Let's make it concrete just before we move on to the next important thing we're going to spearhead here. To make it concrete, basically we're going to talk about animal evidence and human signals a little bit. Rapamycin is an interesting example. It's one of the more famous ones you hear people talk about on TV. It's an mTOR inhibitor, and mTOR is just a kind of a nutrient sensing pathway that relates to growth and division, has other regulatory functions as a master regulator. Now, there was a NIA Interventions Testing Program, ITP, which basically, it's the gold standard study that's out there. What it does is it looks at across 3 labs across the country, and it tries to have a highly, highly robust study with large numbers of not just mice, but mice that are heterogeneous. That's they're genetically diverse. Because a lot of our studies are based on one exact clone model. What if it doesn't work on another? So they worked very hard to get them genetically diverse and to have it 3 different labs. So we're not convinced if it's just one lab, but if the other 2 labs also reproduce the same effect, we believe that this intervention in mice that extends their lifespan has the potential to do that in humans and might be escalated up for study in humans. That's the idea. That's the principle behind the ITP. And what the first study found, and others found even more effect, was this is 2009, that a 9 to 14% extension in lifespan in these mice. That depends on the gender. The 14% was for the females. And since that time, by adjusting the rapamycin dose, it was more like 20, 25% lifespan extension. And then there were other ITP studies that came after that where, for example, rapamycin was combined with acarbose, and in the male mice, it was like in the low 30s% lifespan extension. So, and relevantly, when you test their function and you test their capability, they are functioning better. So if you look at a video recording of them, in one group, the control group, they're half dead and they're dying, and there's others that are like vigorous at the same age, and then they keep going. That's the model we want for humans. A second interesting category is senolytics. These are meant to clear senescent cells. There's a concept in the hallmarks of aging about senescence. Senescence, some people call in the lay media as zombie cells. It's a little bit of a misnomer because zombies are like kind of really very passive, and these cells are very, very active. It's a cell fate. It's not apoptosis or cell death. It's not cancer, which is another fate, but it's basically prevented from becoming cancer or something bad, and it's really revved up. And long story short, those senescent cells sort of infect, for lack of a better word, it's not an infection, other local cells to become senescent also. So even though we need senescence for things like in utero development in the womb or wound healing, so it's vital, we tend to get more and more senescent cells as we get older. We're less able to clear them. There are ways we clear it, like from our immune system, taking them out when they're no longer needed. And that causes badness, inflammation, inflammaging. And basically, we have some studies now in humans that were able to successfully target these. And we also have animal models where targeting them have increased their function and increased their lifespan. Modestly, but it did increase their lifespan and improved some measures of their health span. So this is one potential. Whether it'll work out, time will tell. But that's just another example. Something else that's even a newer modality is partial epigenetic reprogramming. We're neighbors of Harvard Medical School, so you may know from David Sinclair and other colleagues that there are partial epigenetic reprogramming techniques, not only in some animal models that modestly extend life, but also can help tissue repair for injury and some measures for rejuvenation, some organs. But interestingly enough, in the Sinclair lab, he was able to essentially blind mice or just let them get age-associated blindness, then inject Yamanaka factors, which are related to this sort of resetting epigenetic markers, these markers on top of DNA. Long story short, through this injection, these mice are able to restore some of their vision. How does he know that? Like, it's not like, did you see that, little mousey? Well, it was clever. They actually have something rolling around, and before they were just looking straight ahead, and now their eyes are like tracking this thing, something they couldn't before from age associated vision loss. So this is an exciting area, not just for the future of potential longevity interventions, but also for regenerative medicine and for a variety of different conditions. Just some examples. So what else can I say to make you excited? Because I spent plenty of time depressing you with some of the challenges we have ahead, but also making it clear that we have a choice to make, and we should be making these choices together, right? We should be thinking ahead. So I'll give two examples of something really neat. There's a prize called X Prize Healthspan. Raise your hand if you know Peter Diamandis. Yeah. So he also created the X Prize originally for the space race, and he made very concrete sort of targets. And you only get the prize if you meet the targets, but by incentivizing achieving the target, he was able to accelerate some sort of private space initiatives. And X Prize has been growing to different categories. We now have X Prize Healthspan, which is the second largest category of all of them. And it's a $101 million competition that requires teams to get this, improve functional improvements. That's like specifically muscle, cognition, and immune function. All things so relevant to our function, right? Muscle, how many people do we know fell, can't get up, or can't function, their quality of life stinks. Cognition, we're also all afraid of getting dementia or really want to mitigate that risk. Our immune function, we saw in COVID how that disproportionately affected older adults. Same thing with pneumonia, influenza, all these things that don't affect the younger adults are very harmful later. So this is what's so exciting. They were targeting not biomarkers. Biomarkers are so important, but we don't know if they're really going to do anything. They want to actually prove it's affecting function. So we don't win by moving a number, but in the right direction. We have to slow real-world capacity. So that's a big enterprise, and this is the first year that that's happening. They were able to reduce it to 100 from the many people who competed already, and this is something that I'm actively following. ARPA-H is another major initiative, and this is also new. So you might know that, DARPA, basically it was DARPA inspired, where the DARPA was the defense or military inspiration of these creative, moon, like something totally crazy that wouldn't get funded otherwise, you know what I mean? But just might work. So this is for Healthspan, something good for everybody. These are high reward bets. Prosper is explicitly aimed at developing Healthspan therapeutics. That's part of that ARPA-H. And there are some others like Nitro in front that focus other things. Another example of something very interesting is the proposed TAME study. There's a researcher, same last name as me, but no relationship at all. His first name's Nir. He proposed proposed the TAME study, and the idea is there's some data, and it's mixed and it's inconclusive, but there's some data that possibly metformin may mitigate age-related disease, may extend health span. I could literally spend the next 15 minutes talking about that, explaining all the mixed data, but just trust me on that. I'm happy to unpack that later. So it really needs a trial for us to know, okay? And the exciting thing is if something like this is funded, it's a new scheme for saying if an age-related therapeutic works. Because think about it. Why is it so hard to get these longevity therapeutics? We have cholesterol medications. It's not just that the biology of aging is tricky. It's that if we want to find out whether something actually extends our lifespan, what are you going to do? Randomize some school kids, give them some injections, follow them for 100 years, let everyone pass away and then see if it worked or not? That's not going to work. We need something sooner, and one way to get that knowledge sooner is to have validated biomarkers like we have cholesterol, lipid levels, or LDL or ApoB for heart disease, for example. We need the equivalent for all of aging biology, that trunk, remember the trunk of the tree that gets at all of these diseases at once, and that's an active area of research. But Nir had a brilliant idea. He was like, why not be agnostic to what they die from? Look at all age-related disease. Look at dementia, look at prediabetes and diabetes, look at heart disease, look at stroke, and it's time to event, any of those events. And that will be a surrogate for age. So to be continued, seeking out funding. What could go wrong? Well, in this area for aging biology, because we touched a little bit at the institutional level, is biological ceilings may be real. Fedotchev's resilience limit or Olshansky's projections suggest substantial constraints, at least under current biology, and I would add current technology. Translation from animal models to humans is notoriously difficult. It doesn't always pan out. How many cures for cancer have we? How many cures for dementia have we had for animal models that have not panned out in humans? So we need to make sure that they work. And mice also live in controlled environments. You need to take into account humans working in a very eclectic environment. Like, for example, mice are raised in germ-free housing conditions. So what if hypothetically, we have an immunomodulator that extended lifespan in animal models. What if it extended to them and they're relatively free from germs, but for us, we're out in the real world all the time, you know? So we need to inspect this. But I will say more hopefully about the mice versus human. I said, think about all the cancer cures we've had that we don't, think about all the dementia. You know, when one of the suspected reasons for failures for the animal models to work that well for cancer and work that well for dementia is not simply because we need to humanize them adequately, which we're getting better at, to basically give them some of our genes so they can represent us in the relevant ways for our pathology, but it's because we have these weird animal models where it's like a cancer model, but we like irradiate them with a ton of radiation. We give them this mutagen. That's not what happens in humans. We have a human diet. We might have a little PFAS in our drinking water and little microplastics in our food, but this is over decades and decades. It's a model where we get it as older adults. In other words, it's the biology of aging getting as typically middle age and beyond, most often, except for blood-borne leukemias, a few other exceptions. And the same thing for heart disease. The heart disease models, it's like take a young mouse and give it heart disease. It's like, but that's not the same kind of heart disease, wear and tear and these other things for years. So geroscience has a lot to contribute to having disease-specific conditions as well. So safety is a genuine concern. We don't know the long-term effects of interventions that modify fundamental cellular processes. We don't know their long-term effects. So caution is warranted, but is that going to stop us any more than the Wright brothers stopped testing plane? No, we're going to keep marching forward. Just do it responsibly and with some willingness to take risk, because there's a risk-reward function, and we want to move this field forward. And equity is a real risk. If breakthroughs come through as expensive therapeutics, we want it reaching everyone, right? Although my own philosophy, and I'd be interested in yours, is it's good we think about these things. It's good we plan them and we make it equitable. But many technologies ended up scaling when it starts with a small number of people, when it's extremely expensive. But when we scale it and we test it, we're able to have flat screen TVs for everyone, or whatever it might be, high resolution TVs. So hype itself is dangerous, I need to add. As a longevity medicine physician, or a extended health span physician, hype is all around. It's like really dominant in this field, unfortunately, in every sector. And premature claims can hurt scientific credibility. It can lead to justified distrust, and it can make the field its own worst enemy, because we need supporters, we need funding, we need the right investments in order to actually make the science, which is real, to continue to go forward. So institutional failure modes. This is a scenario to keep policy planners up at night, and this is the transition to the next theme. What if geroscience succeeds and institutions don't adapt? Imagine pension systems designed for 15 years of retirement, now facing 40. Remember, this is part 2, so we're talking about if we extended lifespan by a lot. Imagine career structures that assume you'll peak at 45, and now you're confronting 70-year working lives with no reinvention pathways. Leadership position, politics, business, and academia. Some people have raised the concerns of being blocked by 80-year-olds who see no reason to step aside. Actually, this is something that Peter Diamandis recently brought up in an interview with Elon Musk, or two of them. They were kind of going back and forth. And Peter's comment, and I think Peter Diamandis was on point here if we look at history, most dictatorships haven't continued because a despot lived forever. Rather, it was because it was becoming unsustainable, and there would be a revolution and be overthrown. So I think we all want healthy lifespans, but just to think ahead. Now, failure mode isn't that longevity medicine is bad, it's that biological change can outpace social change, right? We extend lives without extending opportunity, purpose, or equity. That's a problem. That's why institutional redesign isn't a secondary concern, it's a main event. So as Gradden and Scott put it, if we get longevity without purpose, the result is anomie and resentment. So let's make that better now. You with me? Let's make that better. So if more people had more years of capability, multi-stage lives would become normal. You might work intensively in your 30s and 40s, maybe step back for caregiving or learning in your 50s, launching a new career in your 60s, shifting to mentoring, civic engagement in 70s or 80s, then maybe having an encore career if it's that scenario 3 we talked about. These things can become standard, not an exception. And education isn't something you finish at 22. It's something you keep returning to over and over. And intergenerational exchange can flourish. There's so much to be learned. I mean, just think about what's happening in the world today. You would need to actually step back to periods outside of the memory of many people alive today to have some potentially helpful analogies to aspects of what's happening geopolitically around the world. Won't recapitulate it, this is unique. But and every period has its unique challenges. But to have many brains, many perspectives, many insights in one room is a helpful thing. So this is an integrative vision, right? So the moonshot idea here, I told you at the beginning that I would discuss a couple things. I would discuss with you I would discuss that that before we're done, I'll discuss a moonshot, and also I'll discuss you, Long Now Boston, and all of you out there. So the moonshot idea pulls everything together. It's biology, public health, economics, institutions, and ethics. We're not solving pieces in isolation. So what's our goal? Our goal isn't just extending lifespan. It's building societies where longer lives are healthier, meaningful, and equitable, where added lives translate into independence, contribution, and connection. 5 pillars make the integrated approach. First, life course prevention at scale. The biggest near-term wins come when conditions we already know how to influence. Second, age-integrated work and education. Opportunities should track capacity, not birthdays. That means hiring, training, promotion, flexible pathways should be based on skills and performance with supports that keep people productive with these changing longer lives that we're aspiring for, longer, healthier lives, longer, purposeful lives, and longer lives where we're able to actively contribute as long as we have a breath. Third, age-friendly environments. We talked about cities and homes, supporting mobility and transportation. And fourth, geroscience translation with rigorous proof. And that means more than just safety studies. In some areas, I've seen a lot of safety studies that we're really ready for prime time. That has its own challenges, but we need to have pathways for that. Interventions that delay multiple declines at once, validated humans, not just mice, and that means building clinical trial and regulatory pathways, the biomarkers and endpoints to prove real-world functional benefits quickly, safely, and across diverse populations. Now, I've given whole talks and foci around this. It's not the focus today, but suffice it to say, we are underfunding aging biology profoundly. We're talking about a fraction of a percent of the NIH budget going to the Division of Aging Biology that funds the same chronic aging-related diseases that end up being 70-80% of chronic disease. The regulatory structures are amiss. We're used to having a specific indication for disease, and aging is not a disease. And there are ways around the pathway for labeling it a disease, but the bottom line is we need to have a way to fund it and incentivize it, because drug companies aren't necessarily going to pursue research that does not have a particular indication they know will be funded. So the fifth is equity and stewardship, a design contrast. We can't build a 2-speed longevity world. We need to have individuals' longevity, even planetary sustainability. We need to factor in all these things. And I would say that economically, the benefits are strong. Socially, the benefits are strong. and psychologically the benefits are strong. And we want to reiterate these points, but I think we've made a case for the value of this. So the long now perspective. Longer, healthier lives extend the experience time horizon. More people around, capable, engaged long enough to see the consequences of choice about climate, infrastructure, governance, and make long-term thinking less abstract. We're going to live in it, so our stake is higher, and we have more connection with the people for an even longer extension. And we've also seen more. We've experienced more. So how about this distinctive role? Why long now matters? Let's unpack that. Your mission is to expand our sense of time and to be responsible stewards to our future. This aligns naturally with all of these themes because we're having people remain capable long enough to see the downstream effects and take responsibility for a future. The community is positioned to help in specific ways. And ways, I think, long now, wherever you are, or anyone who thinks about long now, is first, you can convene cross-disciplinary exchanges. Like here today, we have architects in the room, we have scientists in the room, we have medical doctors in the room, we have the entrepreneurial community, we have public-private partners. So we want to have these conversations because this is an interdisciplinary future we're creating where this is going to affect everything. Second, you can help shape ethical frameworks for geoscience innovations to be adopted so they can serve long-term intergenerational well-being rather than just narrow short-term interest, which tends to be our myopic tendency as our species when we don't hold ourselves and each other accountable. Third, you can support long-term duration projects, archives, observatories, infrastructure that assume longer lives already. Let's think about building that now, like a clock. And now let's keep adding. Fourth, you could bridge aging biology with deep future thinking. Longevity not as a vanity, but as a tool for extending society's moral horizon. Everything we care about, everything we want to become. So this slide here, designing the future, what I want to say is, let me close by returning to where we started. Longer lives are worth pursuing, not because we want endless life, but because we want more years of agency. We want time to learn, contribute, to love, to steward. The challenges are real: fiscal constraint, care shortages, inequality, ageism, risk of hype, but they're solvable with disciplined design. The combined approach matters: systems, lifestyle, public health, environment, institutions. In science, geoscience translation with rigor and thoughtfulness of engaging responsibly and with, I would say, courage. We don't have to choose. The best outcomes come from the compounding benefits of having both. So the question I want to leave with you today, before I open it up to questions, I'd love to exchange with all of you, is it's not how long do we want to live. That's personal. It's how long, it's how we live well, and who gets to, how do we ensure that? It's the question that matters. It's the one that this community with this long-term lens and commitment to being good ancestors is uniquely positioned to help. So how can we live long well? Thank you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And this is my QR code if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn.
We have time for questions, so just raise your hand. Yes.
This is a little bit, well, in Long Now, we often frame ancestors in aggregate, like, as a species. And so it's a little unfamiliar to be thinking in terms of quality of life of each one of those people. But we talked a lot about end of life. Apparently in 2023, the UN is saying it looks like it was the first year of population decline in the world. So how do you take that into account in statistically and philosophically?